welcome you all to Eco Action Tuesdays. My name is Penny DePaula, and I'm the coordinator of the program, and I'm glad that you joined us this evening to hear what Krishna has to say. Our overarching theme again this year is climate change.
Thank you.
Almost everyone knows what this is to some extent. At the beginning of each presentation, this will be very briefly addressed. The warming of the earth and the air that surrounds it is known as global warming. Climate change is the result and is caused by humans, from agriculture to deforestation, transportation, overconsumption, and so on. Each month we look at a different cause, delve into ways to slow climate change, and what we as individuals at the local level can do to make a difference. I'd like to thank MG&E for sponsoring Eco Action Tuesdays. Without them, this program wouldn't be possible. Thank you as well to the team members of Eco Action Tuesdays. These people that have been walking around, Sue, Linda, Ross, they are the foundation of the program and have kept it going for 7 seasons. This is a zero waste program thanks to TerraCycle. At my home, I have an all waste box. It's something that you can purchase from TerraCycle and then put anything into it. When it's full, you seal it up, mail it off to them postage free. They pay for the postage, and you can get another box and start again. Whatever items can't be composted this evening will go into that box at my house for recycling. So please put all of your refuse into that blue recycle container sitting by the table over there. Next month's program will be e-bikes and B-cycles. After the presentation, we'll be trying out the bikes. Later this season, we'll be going to Aldo Leopold Nature Center, Second Harvest Food Bank, and the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District Wastewater Facility. You don't want to miss these on-site visits. We've done them before, and they are amazing. Lastly, please, if you will, fill out the comment card that you found on your chair. It's helpful for future programming planning, and the library director likes to see how we're doing. Now, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. Krishna Elwell is a Monona Grove High School junior. He played an integral role in the placement of the solar array on the high school roof, is a student representative on the school board, has contributed guest columns to the Herald Independent, which we have copies of over there if you'd like to pick those up, is a member of DCYEC, and assisted at a youth environmental conference called Glasgow to Dane County. I would hope that he would tell us something about that. Thank you, Krishna, for coming to speak this evening.
All right, so to get it out of the way, she was very helpful in reading out my resume. Sounded really cool, honestly impressed myself. Before I begin, just a quick thanks to, of course, Monona Public Library and MG&E for sponsoring this event. Shout out to TerraCycle as well. I think that sounds pretty amazing. But let me begin. Who am I? Why am I here? A high school junior. Surely I have better parties to go to on a Tuesday evening. After all, what high schooler isn't living the life? But the reason why I'm here is very simple, and it goes back to about, say, 4 or 5 years ago when I was in 7th grade. I don't know how many of you have kids or know anyone in the Monona Grove School District. I'm actually there as an open enrollment kid. I technically live in Madison. So right away, my entire experience in Monona Grove High School, I've always been an outsider. Granted, yes, I came in as an outsider in about 2nd grade, so what was that, maybe 8 years ago? But for me, and of course many other factors in my life, the fact that my mother is Indian, my father is American, living on the sides of both cultures in a world where, in a country where different cultures can either be our saving grace or our downfall, that's something that's always struck me. And so that's why when in 7th grade, my teacher came up to me, her words really rung with me. And our entire units were focused on the environment. We talked about agriculture, we talked about global warming, and the message was very clear that the world is on absolute fire. And if we don't do anything about it, well, we're gonna be in a bit of a hot spot a few years from now. And so with that, I was found to be very anxious about that. I was like, well, okay, the world's on fire, what does my life matter? And so with this, I was constantly battling in my mind, okay, what do I mean? What can I do about this? I mean, if the world's future is so clearly set in stone, is there any sort of inherent value on my life? Am I just consigned to oblivion and my fate is already written by people I never knew and people I will never meet? And so with that, I took this message from my 7th grade classroom, is that above it all is that I have to use my voice to speak out. And so I did. I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to do so actually the summer right after. You see, we had a summer school program at the middle school, which, I mean, you know, being an angsty little youngster in middle school, that was a really great experience for me. And so I got to do all sorts of classes like PE, gym sports, as well as theater. And one class I did was public speaking, which, I mean, I'm just a terrible public speaker, as I'm sure you could tell. And so in that class, she gave us an option. We were going to do a play, but if you really wanted to, you could also volunteer to read a short little script in front of a crowd. Now, most of the scripts she had were pre-written. They were kind of just these jaunty little tunes or some quick little stand-up bits, but I decided to write my own. And of course, to me, being, say, 12 years old, I really wasn't too worried about the crowd or anything, but I will tell you, the first time I did a practice run in front of my peers, it was the day before, and oh, good Lord, I was terrified. It didn't really help that my crush was in the crowd. Even in summer school, I couldn't escape her. So that really hit hard. But then, I kid you not, on the day of the presentation, well, she was just another face in the crowd. My parents were there. In fact, my grandmother, who's all the way living in India, she had come over to the US to stay for a brief visit, and she was there. She watched me. She doesn't really speak much English, mostly Hindi, Malayalam, more Indian dialects, yet it was still really good. Because regardless of who you are or where you're from, you can understand the language, you can understand the facts when you see all of these debates in the world going on about climate change. Because this isn't just simply a Wisconsin issue. This isn't an American issue. For the first time, perhaps in world history, we are strangely united to solve an issue that, well, we've never truly seen before. We've never really had a position where the choices that we make right here in this room could affect someone living in Singapore or in France. We've never been in a position where the laws drafted in Congress could affect somewhere else in the world far more than any war, deployment, earthquake, or any other crisis could. And that is what drew me to the climate crisis. It's because regardless of all that is going on, I have a voice, and that is what I learned that day. Of course, I was talking about a bit more subtle topics. You know, it's just simple things like recycling. To me, that was the issue at the time, that we needed to recycle, that we needed to take responsibility for what was given to us, and the challenges that we now faced. And that seemed like a pretty simple message to push forth. And so, summer school ended, I gave the speech, and life just kept on going on. 8th grade happened, my classes were absolutely amazing. I had this one teacher, shout out to Miss Johnson if you ever get to see this one day. You were an amazing advisory teacher. There was also another girl I had a crush on. Ooh, that was a bit of a storm. And I think you get the point. Climate change was pretty far removed from my mind. And so there I was, living happily ever after. I even asked out a girl once. I had a girlfriend. That was amazing. Until, gee, what happened in 2020? God. I'm sorry. You honestly have to tell me. I cannot remember what happened in 2020. Because we took a class trip to Washington, D.C. That was so amazing. And then 1 month later, I'm sorry. 1 week later, COVID-19. That was a bit of a mess. Unfortunately, my life was a bit of a crisis at that time. My girlfriend and I know, you were rooting for us, you were cheering for us. We broke up. I felt pretty terrible after that. And then, of course, COVID. I'm an only child. And so living as an only child in a town in Madison, in a town where none of my friends lived, wasn't exactly the great feeling. And so there I sat in my room. The teachers kept on sending us async assignments, for us to do our work, for us to keep going. And the way I do them is they would post all of our week's work instantly on Sunday, so I would just quickly do them. But even still, there was a bit of a hollowness inside. And indeed, I picked up my life. I moved on from what was going on. I started running again. I was getting ready for the track and field season that year. That really didn't go my way. But as I sat in my room, door locked, the windows and blinds closed, it was hard not to feel something that I truly never felt before, which was desperation. I mean, again, that was something I'd never felt before, and surely the world had never felt before. I mean, what do you do when you cannot even go outside your own front door? And for once, oddly enough, we were so divided, and yet that was an experience that united the world. I mean, if you remember, even the celebrities, in the multi-billion-dollar mansions, they had something to worry about in their lives, just as we did. I mean, there were constantly videos on the TV screen about just common people in New York cheering on medical workers as they left from their buildings, as they left from work. And so as I was going through that year, a simple question came up in my mind. What am I going to do about this? And so, as I told you, my own life is starting to go back up again. Like I said, I started exercising. I started reading so many books. Colony in a Nation, if you haven't read it, it is an amazing read. It talks about a lot of the current BLM movement. It was published sometime last decade. And little did I know how useful that book is going to be in just about a month from then. Because, as you all remember, George Floyd. And all of the BLM protests, riots that came after it. Now that lit a fire under my arse, because for the first time, yes, I'd felt desperation. That was going on. And of course, for the first time, I was depressed too. Although then again, no matter who you are, where you are, teenage years are never really easy. For the first time, I saw myself seeing all these events on the TV screen and knowing I had no voice in them. I couldn't vote. I still can't vote. I couldn't go out and march on the streets. My parents said no matter how many times I asked. And yet, I still wanted to do something. I didn't have social media either, so it's not like I could just tap my friends, post a picture of a black square or post this, repost that. I genuinely had no voice. I mean, can you just imagine? Can you imagine that for months on end? And then, well, things kind of actually started to change. The good news really came when the school year started for me. Because, of course, I had a bit of a distraction at my fingertips. Schoolwork, homework. For once, that was actually a good thing in my life. I got back into my groove. I got back into my stride. I joined this club called Model UN. If you've never heard about it before, it's actually a really big program at the high school in particular, where students get together and they basically act as politicians of countries and solve world problems. Very apt at the time, I'd imagine. And I met so many people through it. Now, I'm not a part of Model UN anymore. It was an amazing journey, and I'm thankful for it because it gave me my voice. There was one night, December 3rd, I still remember it, where we all got together on a Zoom meeting, and we were talking about how to make our opening speeches. Basically, big conferences like this, you walk up on stage and you state your position, your country's position, to all these major international topics. This conference, I was playing the role of China, and the crisis that we were discussing, the Uyghur Muslims imprisonment. So before I walked in the door, I was the bad guy, and I really had to defend that. And so on and on the story went. I played China, I played British admiral in the War of 1812, Saudi Arabia, I played a Chinese politician again. And then this was all going great for me. I found a friend group, I found meaning, I found something to do. And yet, was it about climate change? Not yet. But that's when that changed. There was this one girl, Mari Gary. She graduated the year after. And she texted me one night. It's like, hey, I know this group called DCYC. Penny was gracious enough to mention it earlier, which was the Dane County Youth Environmental Committee. And I would love for you to join, and if you want to, let me know. Well, this was my chance. So I got back to her and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, count me in. What do I have to do? And she basically gave me the contact of someone named Daphne Joyce Wu. And so I sent Daphne Joyce Wu an email, and here I was thinking that Daphne Joyce Wu was, well, an adult. So I was very formal in my email. Good morning, Miss Wu. It is an honor to be in your correspondence. I look ever so greatly forward to our collaboration. And then I realized that Daphne was a junior in high school. I kind of nerded myself out there. But thankfully enough, Daphne was really welcoming. And what was it, maybe March, April of that year? So we're talking about maybe 2 years ago, actually. I came in my first meeting. It was on Zoom. And it was really cool because suddenly I met all of these people, all high schoolers across the county who were interested on one thing: climate change. And that's it. There weren't any adults. This wasn't built by adults at all. This is an entirely youth-run organization made up of high school students, Dane County Youth Environmental Committee. And so as I sat there, I started speaking my mind. I was talking about this issue and that issue and how I felt about it. And for the first time in this story, I started talking about climate change and how I felt about it. And I remember that. And again, as I walked out of that room, I joined another meeting the next month. And as I started talking more and more, it started feeling like I could actually do something about it for the first time. And so flash forward about a few months after that, she contacted me and she wanted me to be the vice president of the organization. Think about it, I just joined a couple months ago. Now she wants me to help run it? Well, I mean, you're going to see a common motif of this. I decided to go on that opportunity, and so it went on and on and on. And that's the story of how I started my journey. That's what eventually would lead me to today. Because later that month, that year, we would organize to lead the first county-wide youth environmental conference called Glasgow to Dane County. Now what this was is basically as politicians met in, as namesake would have it, Glasgow to discuss all that was going on about climate change. A lot of politicians were there. I think I even saw an Obama speech on there. The point was that, okay, how are we from the world to our county going to take action on this? And again, yes, this conference was set up by adults. If you've ever heard the name Bob Kushlinger or Kathy Kunz, she is the director of the Office of Energy and Climate Change in Dane County. They helped set up this conference, but they let youth take the lead. And the moment I got into the Zoom meeting to help plan with them, I said, you've got to give youth the mic. You've got to let us go up there in front of everyone else and the cameras and say what is on our minds. And so they said, okay, we'll do that. We want you, though, to give the first speech, and then it'll be like an open night session, all right? And so that's what I did. I kid you not, I was a bit of a procrastinator. I only wrote my speech the day of. However, I came back strong, and I got my speech out there, and so many people started walking up to the mic. Sturgeon Moritz, he's a guy I met through this conference. He came up there, he's so full of energy, moving all around, and there were so many people after him who were all talking about the same thing. Yeah, we can't vote. Maybe we can only talk on social media or in our own cliques in high school. Maybe we aren't like everyone else around us, adults, who can actually step up and make a change. Or at least that's what they want us to believe. We can make a change. We just have to use our voice. And so eventually, opportunities would compound. Penny, again, mentioned that I worked for the solar array. I worked with my high school, my school board, to build a solar array on Monona Grove High School. That was another accomplishment. We eventually had another climate conference a year after that, last November, which again, DCYC and I took the lead. And all of these other opportunities, writing for the Herald Independent, that was something I was very lucky to have. My first article for the Herald Independent, though, wasn't about climate change. It was actually about how libraries are important for the community. I actually wrote it upstairs. So, you know, you can actually make a difference in your local library. And so on and on and on it went until it eventually led to the point where I'm standing here today. I've met with the governor, talked with him. By the way, did you know that his glasses are Columbia? So you know that about our governor now. I've talked to so many officials, especially at MG&E. I've written so many think pieces, done presentations and speeches at schools, all to use my voice. That way I would never feel like how I felt in that room again. So that way I wouldn't feel like I was powerless. And who knows? You know, maybe 50 years from now, we'll look back on our history, and maybe we did not have much of a shot. At least that's what the media wants to say. Because negativity sells. Or maybe we'll look back on this and see that this was the moment where both generations came together. And maybe if I can be an optimist here, maybe this can be a moment where, despite all of the mess that our world is going on, maybe, just maybe, with the advent of new technology, with greater diplomacy, with just a simple will of optimism, we can see the brighter side of humanity in dealing with this struggle. I don't know. That's for us to decide. But I can certainly tell you more about my journey. And so now I want to open it up to you. What's on your minds? I remember you were talking earlier as I walked in. What's your name to the crowd?
Mark Buffett. So, as you're talking, and you're an inspiring speaker, an inspiring young man, and I think, okay, I'm this mid-60s guy, but I'm doing what I can, but I'm not doing enough. And so I want to know from your generation what you would love to see from people your parents' age and older, and what kind of intersection, what kind of collaboration, what can I do to help, promote and to encourage people like you, youth like you, young people like you, because the world that we're leaving, that I'll be leaving, that I won't see 50 years from now, you will be knee-deep, neck-deep in it. So tell us in this audience here, what can we do to help you?
Yeah. No, I really like that, Mike. So, yeah, thank you for telling me. Because, of course, that is the obvious bit of a caveat here. I'm a kid. And yeah, I have a great story to tell for it, but at the same time, you have lived very different lives from mine. And so with that, I would say the best advice I can give to you is probably the most open-ended and broad. Because if I had to go back 2-3 years ago and talk myself through what my journey in high school would look like, well, it would seem kind of impossible. I really wouldn't know what to do. And the great thing about my story is that I never knew what I was getting into when I started. I kind of just kept on going, and I found opportunities along the way. And indeed, I was really lucky for that. But as it comes to your generation, well, I understand that for you, being on this world a lot longer than I have, there's definitely a different perspective when it comes to these world issues. And with that, I would say the first and most immediate advice I can tell all of you is that you have a voice. And I know it doesn't seem like you, or maybe it does seem like you could use it, or maybe it seems like you can't use it. That's ultimately up to you to decide. Because my favorite thing about dealing with sort of any issue in your life is that you can think that you're not at fault for anything. You can think that nothing is your fault. And indeed, I didn't ask for climate change to happen. But regardless of who caused what, you are still responsible to take an action on it. And really, that's true with climate change or politics or pretty much any small detail in your life, down to who forgot to get the milk in the morning. And so boiling all of this down, what I want to say is whether you have your job or your family or, of course, your own community, you have a voice. One of these articles I wrote down here is this, The Climate Crisis, Why Town Boards Will Save Us. And the reason why I talk about that is, city board, I should say, is because I actually talked to our city board as, Sue, you work on the city board as well.
Sustainability.
True. And with that, I mean, granted, yeah, the city board, is that going to change politics in, say, London or Moscow? Maybe not. But that's somewhere where you genuinely have a voice. I mean, how many of you here are residents of Monona? Like, raise your hand. All right, Cottage Grove in the audience, McFarland. All right, well, Monona folks, I can truly say that your town is very lucky to have a lot to do with this issue. I remember we were talking earlier about the use of salt. Now, oftentimes road salt, especially in the winter, is needed, yes, but excess, it can go into the drainage and out into our lakes. And I know you mentioned, I believe, was it you, who was talking about the water softener? No. Sorry, right next to you. I'm sorry. But yeah, what was that about?
Well, I mean, as an example, I saw a woman in Farm and Fleet, and she had an entire shopping cart full of about 6 bags of salt and was pushing it, trying to get it to the checkout. And I thought, oh my gosh, all of that salt is just going to go directly into our water system. And that's just one home, one person, and stocking up on salt. And can we find a way to use less salt?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Because, of course, I know I'm talking about my voice, but yet there are choices that you make, my voice, but there are a lot of choices that you make every single day, such as buying that sort of salt. For you mentioned that you actually have solar installed on your roof. You even go through a pilot program with MG&E that allows you to have a battery. I mean, that's a very small difference in the grand scheme of things, but it is a change. It does make a difference. And that's the whole point. If I'd known where my story would have gone, I would have thought it was impossible. It was just simple, small choices along the way, just reaching for an opportunity that eventually would lead me to all sorts of destinations that, especially as a high schooler, I would have thought to be impossible. And so it starts there. What is your buying conscience? Because that was one thing that was really impressed to me in 7th grade is, what are you using? Where does it go? How does that affect around you? Now, of course, I know there's a common quote going around, especially around Instagram or the media, that most of the environmental pollution is done by big corporations. That's a bit of a dire message because, well, I am not the head of ExxonMobil. And so what choice do I have in that sort of thing? And quite frankly, I mean, those questions are harder to answer because it's not really easy for a guy like me to go up to big oil, big pharma, or any other of these companies and say, stop what you're doing. That would kind of suck. And so with that comes this big question of human nature. Now, if I were to say, open this door and bring out a bear into the room, well, you'd probably jump up, you might fight back, you might freeze, you might run out. You'd be able to react quickly to that threat. But you talk about something as abstract as climate change, maybe, I don't know, in 30 years we'll have a problem. Well, why worry about that now? Because that's human nature. We're designed to think about that threat right in front of us. We're not designed to think about what's going to come, say, years, decades from now. And so that truly is the question. Like when you say, what can I do about it? I know I've talked about 2 things so far. Use your voice, especially in your community, and evaluate your choices that you make on a daily basis. That's easy. But I'm going to give you the third and say that since this threat is both here and now and yet so far out, it's very clearly my generation's lasting achievement on how we deal with this. And I'm not sure if any of you are parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, but really, regardless of who you are, I would say one of the biggest things you can do is let younger people have the mic. Because ultimately, I'm just one voice. I mean, a lot of the people I work with on DCYC, just name drop a few, like Sturgeon Moritz, who I talked about earlier, Xanthi Solomon, Mary Kahns, who actually worked with me on the solar panel project. I mean, all of these people, yes, you've never met them, but I could give you at least 50 names of people who I know, young people like me, who are trying to make a difference in their communities. Listen to them. And yeah, I know, you might be thinking, well, I don't know anyone like that. trust me, if you try looking for them, you will find them because they're everywhere. We are the next generation. And if you give us the mic, trust me, we will be ever so glad to have it. And granted, of course, like every generation, I'm not guaranteeing that to be perfect. We'll all make mistakes, we'll all mess up, just like every other generation. And that's kind of the point. Because that is how we build our future. That is how we leave this world just slightly better for our children. And that's the opportunity we have. And so I'd say that's why the third biggest thing is let young children, let the next generation, have the mic. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts from the crowd? Like you, what's your name? Ah, okay. Well, beautiful name.
So a comment and a question. It seems like you may have discovered it already where you say you are surprised as to where life's taken you, but I'll throw out that if you keep your eyes open and you're willing to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, you never know where life will take you. So my question is, if you were to say you've worked with youth groups, if you were to point out 2 or 3 points that are on their mind, in other words, what are the 2 or 3 points that the youth that you've worked with would like to bring across, either solutions or 2 or 3 points?
That is interesting. I would say that a lot of the youth I work with on this are more, say, left-leaning. So of course those solutions tend to offer and go to that side of politics. I would say the big thing that they want to push, and a message I'll definitely push because I have firsthand experience with it, is firstly, sustainability. When I'm talking about sustainability, I mean not only just conscious about waste, for instance, but especially in green technologies, solar, wind, geothermal, just to name a few. Now that is a choice we can all make instantaneously, because what I have been grateful to notice about sustainability is that it is not just good for the environment. It's not just green to go green. In fact, you can end up with more green in your pocket because looking at the solar array at Monona Grove High School, we're actually saving money on that right now. Even though we just installed it last year, it's cash flow positive. And in 30 years, we'll save a net of $1.5 million. So quite frankly, I don't care whether you're a hippie or a redneck, because ultimately, if you can agree that, hey, I'd like some extra cash in my pocket, then maybe sustainability is for you. And after all, these green technologies are no different than any sort of investment. I mean, for instance, you have a Roth IRA, or maybe you go through a brokerage account like Vanguard, Charles Schwab. Same concept. You put money aside now, so that way you can see a return later. And just purely from a financial perspective, we now live in an era where technology allows us to invest in sustainability. So I'd say that's the first point I'd make, is that really encouraging sustainable methods, not only through like waste or behavior, but also especially in technology. The second thing I would say is that, of course, I don't want to beat a dead horse here and say, listen to the youth, because I feel like that point has definitely come across. But I would say that another thing we really are looking forward to is representation. We're looking for more opportunities. I know a guy through DCYC, his name is Carson, and he's really trying to work with his city council, his mayor's office, and his school district on how to make them more sustainable. Now, yes, obviously the benefits are clear, and being in Dane County, perhaps the point would get across better here than in other places too. But at the same time, he keeps on getting stonewalled. He finds that people don't really want to listen to him. It's this constant running around of talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person. And so it kind of breaks down. And so I'd say the second biggest point that we are looking for is that we want to see elected officials especially, but really anywhere in general, listen to us. And we have the solutions. We are definitely working on them. For instance, I work with ACE, or Action for the Climate Emergency. And what they want to do is they want to go to Governor Evers and tell him to declare a climate emergency. He actually declared an emergency with COVID-19. And basically, it mandates that every county from across the state needs to organize a plan as to how they're going to deal with this challenge within a very short time period. And like that, it'll be implemented across the state. Unfortunately, though, even though I actually went up to Evers when he was in one of our classrooms and talked to him about that, we're still being stonewalled. If you want an actionable item, I would definitely say join communities like this, such as ACE, Action for the Climate Emergency. There's also Wisconsin 350. They're doing tremendous work from across the state. So if you want to hear the youth voice, if you want to give them a chance, definitely look at organizations you can join. Yeah.
Yeah. Krishna, I was going to say, I mean, I could see, asking the governor to make a climate emergency declaration, and I can just work in my mind all of the issues. I mean, for this to go out to communities, is there funding for communities? Is it an unfunded mandate? That's the first thing. You know, you're going to ask people to do something beyond what they're doing now, when those communities have been starved by the state legislature for money. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that, they have to be delved into and looked into to say, is this feasible? And what are the steps to choose to make it feasible? So those are a lot of the things I think that go through their minds as they see a larger picture. You know, so I'm just wondering, is your generation, I mean, there's got to be a lot of discouragement. I mean, I look at the gun issue in Tennessee. Here, the students got out of the classrooms, marched up to the Capitol, do something. And what did they get? Complete stonewall. You know, even though the public wants it, we're not going to do anything. You know, and so is your generation ready to do the long haul? I mean, it's going to be a slog because you're trying to change an environment where even if the people want change, the powers that are in power are unwilling to do anything. You know, so I like your approach going down to the community level. You know, and I think that works here in a more progressive community. I'm just wondering how that would work in a, Rhinelander or some place up north, that doesn't have such a progressive community. Can you get in there? Do these people know even the questions to ask? What do we do?
Have you ever been to a place called Boulder Junction?
No.
Boulder Junction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a place actually just north of Rhinelander. My family has a cabin there. So I've spent I spent a lot of my life there. And so yeah, when you say that, I mean, that is a really good point. I mean, of course, it's really easy for me to speak to this camera, speak to this audience about, all these really hip and hype ideas about what our future can be, and about how going green is amazing. Of course, playing to my audience. But say if I were giving the same speech in a town hall in Rhinelander or Boulder Junction, how does that change? At the second climate conference I went to back last November, one of the keynote speakers made a really interesting point. According to a study, the more scientifically literate people were, the concern for climate change actually went down. And the big shock for that was that before, people expected it to be completely opposite, and yet the study had proved that once these issues became solidified in people's heads, they were not going to change their opinions on it. And because of that, they often held more radical and even more destitute views. And so with that, I come back to Manitowish Waters. And I remember seeing an election over there with all the signs going up. Of course, I, again, couldn't vote. I don't believe my family did either. But the big thing in Manitowish Waters and Boulder Junction was ATVs. Now, if you go up to Eagle River, ATVs are legal. If you don't know what Eagle River is, it's this like small town at the very tip of northern Wisconsin. And ATVs can go around all they want over there. But yet in Manitowoc Waters and Boulder Junction, but they're really close to each other, well, they are outlawed because people are afraid that if they allow ATVs, that's going to be too much of a disruption. Now, on the outside, that issue doesn't really have anything to do with climate change or global warming. If Manitowoc Waters or some other small town that most people here have never heard of allows ATVs, well, that's all the same to us. That's not really going to change anything. But what strikes me is a sentiment about it. Because they're not talking about emissions or EV charging stations or solar panels, but ATVs, that's what matters to them. And in a way, that is for sure an environmental issue. Keeping lakes clean is a huge deal to them because that is central to their culture. And quite frankly, people's cultures and opinions change. And of course, this is going to be a moment of a bit of hypocrisy for me tonight. Because obviously I've been using these terms such as climate change, global warming. They're buzzwords, you know what they are. You can instantly think of at least 10 different memorized facts from unmemorized sources, or the media constantly blaring their message to you. And yet, of course, we know what the dictionary textbook definition of climate change or global warming is. But what does that mean to us? What is this threat that we find? And as you go to different communities, what they care about is going to be different. So that's why, and I believe I wrote about this in Why Town Boards Will Save Us, which is available if you want to grab it on your way out. It's that all of these buzzwords are for politics. The very instant, some big politician gets up there, speaks into the camera, and they get a response from their audience. That's what they want. But yet, well, on the more community level, that's going to change to each community their own. And so as it relates back to your question, I would say the biggest saving grace can be to relate to different perspectives. And granted, yes, I mean, that's going to be a bit of a balancing act, and that's not designed to work in every scenario because it can't. Climate change isn't a problem with emissions or politics. It's a human issue. Because if you remove all the debates, if you remove all of the evidence of what climate change is, at the end of the day, you'll see that we just don't really know how to deal with this threat so far out, because that's not what humans are designed to do. And so that's why, by bringing it down to, at least at first, a local level, and at least at first by relating it to issues in the communities that people truly care about, that's why you can try to reach across the aisle. That's why you can go up to someone you don't even know, but yet you can still find a common solution. So at all things, avoid maybe buzzwords like climate change, global warming, and see what matters to them. Because just as these issues matter to us, there are issues that matter to people thousands of miles away that even we still can relate to.
And just to add to that, I mean, there may be actually some leverage involved in there too. For instance, if communities are stressed for money, it may be financially to their benefit to start looking at alternative energy in the sense that they can save money. And I mean, if you could show them on paper where in the long run they'll actually be more beneficial doing this, that pressure that they have, of lack of funding can actually move them to do something like that.
Yeah, in my previous response, I didn't really talk about the financial perspective. But actually, I do have something to say about that, because if anyone remembers from the news last year, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. One of the biggest things that came out of that bill was a 30% direct pay tax credit. And what it allowed for is that basically any community entities could apply for a federal government grant that would back 30% of the cost for compliant energy projects, renewable energy projects. And so what that has done is it allows communities a new angle, a new incentive on projects like these. And I remember now going back to my school here with the whole solar array business. The way we financed that was through bonds and grants. Now, actually, I remember a lot of my friends coming up to me about this project and saying, ugh, I wish we didn't do this. Our taxes are going to be so high now, and the jobs, oh dear Lord, think about the economy here. So many jobs are going to be destroyed by the solar array. Which, no. The biggest problem is, going back to the financial perspective, is all these misconceptions. And honestly, that is, again, a human issue. That's a much harder argument to go after, because people aren't changed by arguments. They're changed by experiences. And so with that, how do you give someone the experience of looking at charts, looking at graphs, looking at numbers, and saying, hey, this will be great for your community, just let us do that? I mean, that's a much harder angle to go at. And so yeah, there definitely is an incentive with sustainability. Sustainability isn't just good for the environment, it's also good financially. But yet, at the same time, you're battling that mindset. Because of course, I mean, if say EVAs were to declare a climate emergency, well, now you have a lot more debates on the table. That comes specifically in big government versus small government. You have particular interests going for goals that they want to achieve that may not align with everyone else. And you go down all of these lines. And yes, of course, those are all problems. But at the same time, there is one central point about all of this, whether it's about climate change or really anything else, is that we do not need hope to deal with all of the messes that we faced. In fact, it is that we must first have a mess that creates hope. That is a struggle of humanity, that from ancient times to sometime in the near future, when we are, say, well, if you're religious, perhaps up in the kingdom of heaven. If you're more analytical, maybe when all of our consciousness are uploaded into the cloud. And our soul mortal struggle in this time that we exist here on earth is to, quite simply put, deal with all the pain, all the challenges of our life in front of us, and actually make a solution. I don't know if any of you have read Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a nerd. And basically, his main central argument is that the only meaning in life is what we create out of it. That humans are a transcendent species. That we go from savage to transcendent, and yet every single life, every single generation, every single issue moves us ever so slightly closer to transcendence. Now, of course, I bet you didn't come here for the whole mystic religions philosophy talk, but the point I want to bring out to you is that the world has always been messed up. The world will always be messed up. And yeah, I mean, as times go on, the world will only seem to be more messed up than it was before. But that is simply because we can't solve problems. And the problems that we can hope to face after we've found solutions are bigger and better problems. Problems that make us more meaningful, more innovative, more inspired. So that way, when we can pass it on to the next generation, yes, those problems might be bigger, but they will be better problems. And so that's why I come up here and I speak a vision of optimism. Because beyond all of that, I know that if we can manage to actually get this, if we can actually manage not even to get this right, but if we just try, if we just do something, then we can move the world along from this room. And so that's the belief that gets me up in the morning. And hey, that's true from everything from climate change, what I've taken up this whole hour to talk about, to even just small things like asking a girl out to prom, which I did do today. Answer was no. And so with that, I'll wrap up my response to you with this, is that whether you're looking at a financial perspective from this, an environmental perspective from this, or really anything else, at least one common tie that we have is that we're all facing those challenges together. And yeah, I mean, just saying unto this crowd, just try, just do, that's maybe not the response that you came here for. But I know that if you do, if you at least choose to be something, instead of choosing not to be something, you will find yourself transformed, and hopefully the rest of the human race along with you.
I've got a question for you. So you know the Boulder Junction area, and you know that the north part of our state, all these beautiful lakes. And lakes are an important part of their culture, their economy, tourism. Clean lakes, there's this notion that a lake that's full of algae and these algae blooms because of runoff and the fertilizers and all that. You know, we see that more down here. Up north, not as much, but there's that invisible part, like if the mercury levels in those lakes, which is a direct cause from coal burning and fossil fuel burning, that's in their lakes, but they don't see it. And I'm just thinking out loud, and I'm curious to know how you would help a community like that connect the dots in a sense that, well, the future health of these lakes really depends on us continually cutting our emissions, tying in the financial part. So, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I know that Wisconsin sends billions of dollars out of state to bring in coal and natural gas, because we cannot produce coal or natural gas in Wisconsin. We're sending billions of dollars out of state to bring that stuff in here. It just seems like an economic boom. Job creation. And the more energy we create here in Wisconsin, whether it's through geothermal, whether it's through heat pumps, whether it's through solar or wind, you're creating jobs up north, right? You'd be creating all kinds of jobs around renewable energy. And that money, it's like a double whammy on the positive side. Keeping the money in state, helping the environment, but it's helping local communities, and it would lessen the mercury levels, or it would at least stop the mercury levels, let those lakes heal themselves by not being, anyhow. You know where I'm kind of going with this? And so, yeah, how do you connect that and at a community, anyhow? I'll just.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. And that does actually make a lot of sense. I mean, I remember reading history about that town, and 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, all of that area was stripped bare as part of the timber industry.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and it's actually the saplings that were up then now created the North Woods, and that's what we speak of. And you know what, maybe there is a meaning to be found in that history, that as tourism evolved from the dying lumber industry, that perhaps maybe this industry will come after it. I remember though, this is about 2 years ago, 2 years ago. I don't know if any of you watched Tony Evers' State of the State just a few months ago, but in it he unveiled the Wisconsin Clean Energy Plan. And it would try to find solutions to a lot of those issues that you discussed. And I remember actually being on one of the public hearing sessions about that. It was over Zoom. It was actually right before my first conference of Glasgow to Dane County. And that was actually one of the points someone brought up. It's like, yeah, most of our energy is produced out of state. So how are you going to reconcile that within Wisconsin? And yeah, I mean, that definitely would be a potential for the state to access. And quite frankly, it's hard for me to bring up an answer to that, because indeed it is a theoretical question. Because that is a debate that has to be had within that community, and market forces have to be there as well. And personally, I am confident that it will sway that way. How long that might take, or how that'll get done, it's hard to say. Because if I may extrapolate the situation a bit once more, I'm sure all of you remember your high school science classes, I'm still left behind there, about the 3 laws of motion, the 3 laws of Newton. That that every object will stay stationary or in motion unless another force acts upon it, that once a force is exerted upon an object will go in the direction of that force, and with every action comes an equal and opposite reaction. So, you know, there's your physics lesson for the day. But what I find is that human nature is often very similar to those laws of nature. That unless something changes you, a community, a country, a world, unless there's a force to first act on that entity, that's not going to change. Or if that entity is already moving in one way, unless there's a force to stop it, it will continue to move that way. But whatever that force may be, once it exerts that reaction, there will then be the force moving in the direction of that action exerted upon it. It might be slowing down, it might be slowly moving forward, and finally, with every action comes an equal and opposite reaction, that once that action is put out into that entity will react equally upon it. In short, that's pretty much the history of change in the human race. And so when it comes to these towns, it is genuinely hard to say where they will go next, because again, that is a bit of a crystal ball question. But with that sense of human nature, I can say that once market forces, for instance, or people in the community start to use their voices and start to speak up, whether that's in Manchester Waters, Boulder Junction, Eagle River, Madison, Wisconsin, Monona, Wisconsin, regardless of where that is, once people start to bring those forces and push those forces forward, it might not seem like it, but change is inevitable. Now, of course, whether that change is good or bad, that really is all dependent on your perspective. But it can happen, and that's why I believe you can do it. If that goes to your question.
Just a follow-up, I think, with your question. He may have answered a little bit before where he was talking about the ATV, where one approach is kind of meet them where they're at and then move them a little bit. So in your example, in northern Wisconsin, they might be very proud of being self-sufficient. So you work that angle, right? So kind of find where they're at and give them a little move.
Yeah.
Earlier you'd mentioned as far as you kind of passed on the solution, but I'll just throw it out to the group, and I won't get the phrase exactly right, but if you do a search online, it's either called Project Drawdown or Climate Drawdown, but if you Google it, it's a great site giving a whole list of solutions from both academia and industry. So it's, any of you heard of that, either Project Drawdown or Climate Drawdown? So it's a fantastic site to give you very specific things and showing, they go in detail how we have the technology to do it right now. We just need to get our act together. But it's either Project Drawdown or Climate Drawdown. It's a really slick site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will note, sort of to complement that. I mean, there are a lot of places on, for example, the internet, where you can go and you can see other people's opinions. And of course, that does relate back into the earlier point of joining organizations. I mean, I know I name drop a few, like ACE or Wisconsin 350. So I knew them when they were Madison 350, but they've expanded that much in such a short amount of time. So to really just comment your questions, but also throw this out into the crowd, I mean, you came here tonight obviously trying to see what you could do, trying to see what this young kid could say to you to change your perspective on something. And I mean, if you want to carry that on, joining an organization, that's what eventually would lead me here today and so many other places. And maybe that's where you can find yourself making a difference. And that's how you can start to go out to these other communities or these just meet other people and talk to them. Like, sorry. About a month ago, I actually took a family trip to Washington, D.C. We have some family who lives in Virginia, right close to the nation's capital. And it was a really great opportunity because on one day, I actually got to go to the Capitol and saw not just the House, but also the Senate in session. And it was really cool because, right before you go to these places, you need to get a pass. And so we went down to the office of our Senator Tammy Baldwin to get a pass to go into this place. Now, I didn't see Tammy Baldwin, well, actually, hold that thought. But I was actually able to meet a guy there who was working there just on his second day. And I got talking to him, and hang on, let me see if I can actually bring up my notes from that discussion. But basically, he and I were talking about what can the youth do to make their voice heard. I wasn't talking specifically about climate change, but his name was Ben Thomas. So, hey, Ben Thomas, if you're watching this, thank you so much. Got a name drop. But he was really interested because he was a young guy himself. And he talked about how he'd worked for a campaign for Tom Nelson, a Senate campaign. And he had went to every county in the state of Wisconsin. And he was going into crowds where oftentimes he was the youngest person there. Even though he was an adult himself, he was talking to people who were years, even decades older than him. And so reaching across that gap, he realized that, quite frankly, people wanted to hear his perspective, just as much as he was coming there for their perspective as well. And so I'd say that coming from Ben Thomas's story, and then going into the Capitol later that day, it really showed me how many different perspectives there were. Because the Senate was talking about some amendments to the use of force in Iraq, so that didn't have anything to do with climate change. But imagine my surprise when I went to the House of Representatives and saw them debating a bill called H.R. 1. It was a Republican-sponsored bill that would basically go against Biden's current energy policy. Now, personally, me, I'm a bit more of a centrist when it comes to politics, but the tones on both sides were very interesting. Because on the Republican side, it was basically saying that, yes, environmentalism is a concern for sure, but at the same time, we cannot afford to have our energy sources constrained like this. Of course, they're against the president's policy. But on the Democratic side, you were having a much more upbeat concern for environmentalism, saying that what the policy that we're leading forth now under the Biden administration is necessary to continue. My favorite point, and this isn't really related to my topic, but one point I really liked was when this representative from Alabama came up in the most southern accent I've ever heard. I don't have any fancy charts or graphs for you to look at, but I want you to look inside me, inside my heart, inside 63 years of living. So I just had to bring that into the crowd. I thought that was an absolutely amazing. I kid you not, Sweet Home Alabama was on the radio, but even that could not top how Alabama this guy was. And my point is, quite frankly, this: is that as I left Capitol Hill that day, is there going to be a lot of work to do with climate change? Absolutely. And are we absolutely going to mess it up and have problems along the way? Yes. But there are a lot of different perspectives. Just forget about the country, forget about the state, just in this room that we can talk about. And so I would say that it's all around you. You just have to go into it. But yeah, actually, on that topic, I mean, if there's anyone here who would like to bring it up, I mean, what brought you here tonight? I am curious about that.
I think we want to hear the youth perspective that we don't hear. It's almost like we live in these separate
worlds.
communities, separate worlds. Yeah, and it's hard to connect. And I think this is a great connection, you know, to hear your perspective on this. And frankly, it gives us hope, you know, that there's energy out there to change, you know, to carry on. I mean, if we're doing some work to help, you know, alleviate climate change, that there's a successive generation that's going to come in and take over and continue the work that, you know, we start. So I think for me, it's enlightening to see you, you know, involved like that.
Yeah, actually, show of hands here. I mean, how many of you have a child, a grandchild, nephew, niece, whatever? How many of you actually have a relative who's like high school age, middle school age? Any college age? Okay. So yeah, that's actually quite a good number of you. I would say that when it comes to specifically climate change, but other issues, again, I am a bit more moderate, pragmatic. But there's also the simple fact that I'm engaged in this. And for everyone, I mean, yeah, climate change might not be their cup of tea besides. Teenagers have enough going on, so definitely cut them some slack. But I would say that maybe after this, you should talk to them. I mean, I don't know if you have any sort of family events going on. I'm not a stalker, at least not yet. But I would say that you should find a way to just engage them. It doesn't have to be about climate change. I mean, it could be really about anything. Like Biden announces re-election today, maybe talk to them about that, see how they feel about it. Or just anything else. But I would say, yeah, are all kids just this whole beacon of hope, this whole wounded kid that they're just going to give you the most enlightening talk all at once? No. That's going to take time even for them to understand. It's going to take time for me to understand too. I mean, I've gone on this journey flying by the seat of my pants. So when I come up here and so confidently tell you this story, even I really don't know how I got here or what comes next. But at least talk to them. At least go up there as a member of this older generation and let them know that you're there with them.
I guess I have one other question, something that brought me here. It was to hear whether there are projects or ways that, things that you are working on or doing or want to do that where older people could be engaged with you. I see the community as a resource for you. We have our projects too, where some of us we're still working on. But honestly, there are many things that I would love to do in my home to make changes that I can't do by myself. And so I'm wondering if there are ways for older people in the community and younger and middle age. Is there a way to connect us that would help us work together? Can we be a resource for you, or can we be a place where we are able to meet mutually and get to an end point that we are all probably very interested in getting to?
For that, I would say absolutely. I know I come up here and talk about this story like it's mine. It really is not. I've just been so lucky to have found people who have a similar opinion, a similar feeling like me, and found a way to work together with them. And so with that, of course, now that's, I would say that my story comes from a combination of both young and old. Of course, there are people like DCYC, but with that, there are also people like the school board, for instance, that I now serve as a student representative for. And in that, I find a lot of different voices, not just on climate change, but just so much, exactly, yeah, all sorts of things. And so I'd say with that, as far as the community being a resource, that can be really hard to engage in community. It takes a lot of persistence, I feel. And even I really am unsure about how to reach out to the community and find ways to discuss these issues. Tonight was, definitely a lucky start, but what comes next? And so I'd say with that, the first thing I'd say is that as you are a bastion to the community, you have high schoolers who are waiting to give you their opinion, not even a mile down the street. And so I would definitely say that as far as that is concerned, there are so many organizations in my high school that want to make a difference. I know, let's see, what do we have for starters? Of course, there's the aforementioned Model UN. There are a lot of future politicians in that crowd. There's also...
Close in 15 minutes. Please bring your items to the self-check machines for checkout. Thank you.
Shoot, I gotta take my book to the self-checkout. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I would say that as far as opportunities go, at least in Monona alone, I would say that really try to find ways on your end to, if not come to the high school, then at least find people, young people, through, say, for instance, volunteering or anything like that, offer opportunities where young people can get involved. And now I know that's really vague and broad, open to interpretation, because that is something that we're just going to have to figure out how to do. But I would say that there are a lot of young people who are ready and willing to make their voices heard. We just have to find a way to reach out to each other.
So these two organizations, ACE and Madison, Dane County, Wisconsin 350, I'm assuming that those are, like, I've done some work with Madison, or Wisconsin, Madison 350, but I would imagine that are you involved in those organizations, right? Or?
Yeah, I've done work advising them, not an official member though.
Okay. But I would think those organizations have a whole spectrum of people and ages and experience and, I don't know what, anyhow, just a thought.
Yeah, for sure. I actually do know that there is an ACE team, and I'm not sure where they are now, but I do know that they actually at least last time I checked about a year ago, they did meet here in this building. So that's definitely one example of them impacting locally. But yeah, as far as those organizations go, that absolutely is a venture for many people to go down on.
Does your climate change group, you know, at the high school level have regular meetings?
I will admit, as far as a green team goes in Monona Grove High School, we are a bit lacking in that department. I mean, DCYC is good because it's outside of my high school, but it combines students from around the county, so that's how I contribute in that sense. But as far as Monona Grove in particular, is a bit more up and down. And actually, though, I know that this is towards the end of the presentation, but since there's a lot of talk about Monona Grove High School, I would actually just like to briefly go out of my way and tell you about the solar array project. I mean, I won't tell you about my story. I think that's pretty obvious. I was invited to join, and I worked with them as one student representative. Mary Kahns, she's currently a senior, was another student representative, and I believe there were 3 more before us. But basically, the solar array was put up on our roof last spring. And like I said, it took out, or well, at least has the capacity to take out thousands of tons of carbon emissions from our atmosphere. So just on that alone, it covers about 2/3 of our roof, produces about 50% of our energy, and as I mentioned, is already cash flow positive, $1.5 million in 30 years. But here's something else that I thought was really cool. Due to the bonds and grants we accessed to finance this project, a requirement of one of the grants, which was actually left over from the Obama administration, was that all of the solar panels needed to be built in the good old United States of America. And so with that, you have a solar array that was planned in Monona. It was then contracted in Madison by, what was the company? It'll come back to me later. But they were actually built in a solar factory in Dalton, Georgia. And so with this, what I want to bring to you is that regardless of whether or not the media shows it or you see it right in front of you, the change that you want, the change that you seek, is in a way already happening. And quite frankly, I know that just as many people have no right to be pessimistic about the future, I have no reason to be truly optimistic about the future. But that's a choice I choose to make, because I rest knowing that at least if I'm making a change, and at least if there are people listening and trying to make that change themselves, then I, as millions before me and millions after me, do have a chance because we have a voice. And so if there's one message I want to leave you with tonight, it's that you have a voice. Use it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.